My son hadn't picked up his phone in 2 weeks, and I couldn't stand it any longer. I decided to show up at his place without warning. The moment I arrived, though, I noticed movement under my grandson's bed. Later, when the police pulled up the mattress, what we discovered left everyone frozen in shock. If you're listening to this, please like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment about where you're tuning in from. I'm honestly glad you're here, listening. If you're watching this, hit the like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story of revenge from. I really want to know how far it's traveled. I remember that day so vividly. That morning, I caught the first bus heading into Dallas. The ride took 3 hours, and the whole time I barely moved or spoke. My eyes stayed glued to the window, while my chest felt tight, like a knot pulling tighter with every mile. I kept whispering to myself to calm down, but my hands shook as I held the ticket. By the time I stepped off at the central station, the sun was already setting. I walked quickly toward the gated neighborhood where David lived, following the same path I'd walked dozens of times to visit him and my grandson, Ethan. But that evening, every single step felt heavy, like I was walking into a nightmare. Standing in front of the familiar wooden door, I knocked, first gently, then louder, pounding until my knuckles hurt. "David! Ethan!" I called, but my voice cracked in the cold air. No answer. I gripped the doorknob just to test it, and to my shock, the door swung open with a slow creak. Unlocked. My chest pounded so fast I could hardly breathe. David never left the door unlocked, not when Ethan was home. I stepped inside, holding my breath like the smallest sound could shatter everything. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. The living room looked like a fight had broken out. The couch was shoved sideways, a coffee mug lay shattered across the floor, white porcelain mixed with a dried, dark stain. My legs trembled as I tiptoed past the shards. In the kitchen, the water jug was tipped over, and empty bottles rolled across the floor as though someone had drained them in desperation. The smell of dampness and the crushing silence made the hairs on my arms stand up. I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. David's office, empty. His bedroom, empty too, the bed neatly made, as if no one had slept there in weeks. Finally, I reached Ethan's room. "Ethan, sweetheart? Where are you?" My voice was hoarse, desperate. No reply. I stood in the middle of his room, staring at the toys, the Lego pieces scattered, the worn teddy bear, and my chest ached like it might crack open. Then I heard it. A faint noise under the bed, like plastic scraping on wood. My whole body froze, a chill running from the top of my head all the way down my back. My heartbeat quickened until I thought it might burst out of my chest. Something was under there. I wanted to bend down, but my feet wouldn't move. Gripping the desk for balance, I whispered again, "Ethan?" Only silence answered, except for that eerie, rolling sound. Panic took over. I bolted out of the house, dialing the police with hands shaking so badly I had to punch in the number 3 times before it worked. "My son is missing. I haven't heard from him in 2 weeks. I screamed into the phone, my voice cracking. There's something under my grandson's bed." I hardly knew what I was saying. I just knew someone needed to come. Fast. Within 10 minutes, flashing red and blue lights lit up the house. I led 2 officers upstairs, pointing with a trembling finger at the bed. "Under there," I whispered, barely able to look. A tall, young officer crouched down. "Is anyone under there?" he called. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Then both officers lifted the bed in one swift motion. And there he was. Ethan. My grandson, curled up tight. His face was pale, his body frail, his hair clumped with sweat. His clothes were filthy, reeking, and in his hands he clutched an empty water bottle. His wide, glassy eyes stared into nothing, into a world I couldn't reach. I stood frozen, my heart stopping in my chest. Even the officers looked stunned. I dropped to my knees, wanting to hug him, but my hands shook too badly to reach. "Ethan, my boy," I whispered, tears spilling. But he didn't answer. He just clung to that bottle like it was the only thing holding him alive. I didn't know what had happened, but deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of a nightmare. My name is Linda. I'm 61, and I live alone in a small town not far from a major Midwestern city. My story really began that October morning when I first realized David was gone. Those 2 weeks that followed were the longest of my life, filled with endless questions and no answers. On the very first day, I dialed David like I always did, and that's when it all started. I sat at the kitchen table, phone in my hand, listening to it ring again and again until it finally went to voicemail, and there was no answer. I sent a short text, "Are you okay, son?" But it never delivered. A tight knot formed in my stomach. I told myself he was probably busy, or his battery died, or he was somewhere with no signal. David has always been independent, doing things his own way, so I tried to calm down, but the worry kept growing like a slow burn. I called at odd hours, dawn, late at night, even at noon when I knew he usually took a lunch break, and all I got was silence. I left trembling voicemails. "David, where are you? Please call me, I'm worried." But those messages seemed to vanish into thin air. I began imagining the worst because David would never just disappear without a word. He called every week, told me about work, about Ethan, about ordinary father and son life. This silence was wrong. By the 5th day, the anxiety was eating me alive. I even called the landline at his house, hoping to hear a familiar voice, hoping at least to hear Ethan's chatter, but the phone only rang and rang in an empty house until I hung up. I opened the kids' messaging app and typed to Ethan, "Sweetheart, where are you? Call Grandma." The message sent, but there was no read receipt. My heart sank. Ethan is only 8, but he knows his way around a phone and he always answered me right away. I reached out to David's friends and co-workers. They sounded surprised and uneasy. "I haven't seen David all week," one co-worker said. "I thought he was on vacation," another told me. A close friend said the last time they talked was a month ago, that David was swamped with work. The more I asked, the more lost I felt, like I was staring into a void with no answers. 10 days in, I couldn't take it anymore. I started calling neighbors, anyone I had a number for. Their voices on the other end were full of pity. An elderly woman who lives across the street said that during the storm last week she'd seen a light in David's house flick on and then go out. "I thought the boy just turned on a light to go to bed," she said, but her voice trembled and her words cut me deep. Storm night, a light that turned on and off, something wrong. 2 weeks passed and all my searching came up empty. No messages, no calls, nothing. I couldn't sleep. Nights were spent staring at the ceiling, imagining accidents, kidnappings, any terrible possibility. Except I knew David wouldn't leave Ethan, he'd never abandon his son. My chest tightened so much I could hardly breathe, and I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to go to David's house. What I found there only made the fear worse. Now I'm sitting beneath the dim hospital lights, gripping the chair like it's the only thing keeping me upright. The officer carried Ethan out of that cold house and into the patrol car, and I followed like a shadow. When I touched him my hands trembled. I wanted to hold him but I was afraid to squeeze too hard, afraid I'd hurt him. He didn't move, no blink, no sigh, just clutching that empty water bottle like it was the last thing anchoring him to the world. The patrol car tore through the dark streets, siren wailing, and I sat beside him, fanning him with a scrap of paper I'd grabbed and patting his back, whispering, "Ethan, Grandma's here," while he stared at nothing. At the ER they whisked him inside and I stood pressed against the glass, listening to the machines and the doctor's hurried voices. There were no obvious external injuries, but the words that came back like knives were, severe malnutrition, severe dehydration, signs of psychological trauma. Hearing that about my 8-year-old felt like the room dropped out from beneath me. Later they let me in. Ethan was hooked to an 4, a thin tube taped to his tiny arm. His eyes were open, but they weren't looking at me, they were somewhere far away. I took his cold hand and whispered, "Ethan, it's me, Grandma. Wake up." I leaned closer and whispered, "Please, sweetheart, say something." But Ethan didn't answer. He didn't even blink. I sat down beside him on the hospital bed, tears spilling as memories rushed back. The days when he was little, running through my yard, laughing so hard his cheeks turned red, begging me to tell stories about when I was young. That bright smile was gone now, replaced with a heavy, frightening silence, like he had locked his soul away. Before long, the police arrived with their notepads and questions. A young, serious-looking officer sat next to me and asked, "Ma'am, when was the last time you had contact with Mr. David?" I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "It's been 2 weeks," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I called him, I sent messages, I tried everything. But nothing. David would never just vanish, he always called me at least once a week." The officer wrote quickly, nodding, then turned to the doctor to ask about Ethan. They spoke in hushed tones. I overheard, No life-threatening injuries, but severe post-traumatic shock. Those words hit me like a weight pressing down on my chest. What could my grandson possibly have gone through to end up like this? I wanted answers, but the officer only said they were opening a missing person case and asked me to come give a full statement. I shook my head, nearly begging. Please, let me stay with my grandson. I can't leave him alone. They agreed, but their eyes held worry, as if they too sensed the darkness hanging over my family. That night, I sat by Ethan's bed, watching his frail body tremble in restless sleep. Even then, he clutched the empty water bottle tight, as though terrified someone would take it. Sweat soaked his pillow, and every so often he jolted awake, eyes wide with terror, but he never spoke, just stared at me with that hollow gaze. I wiped his forehead with a damp towel, whispering, "Grandma's here, baby," even though I wasn't sure he could hear me. The doctor, a kind middle-aged woman, checked on him and gently touched my shoulder. "Ma'am, the boy needs time. He's been through something awful. Be patient. He'll tell us when he's ready." I nodded, but inside, patience felt impossible. David was still missing, and Ethan was only a shadow of himself. 2 days passed. I barely left Ethan's side, terrified he might slip away if I looked away even for a second. He held onto a teddy bear a nurse gave him, his tiny hands wrapped around it like a lifeline. I tried feeding him spoonfuls of broth, coaxing softly, "Eat, Ethan, so you can get strong and come home with Grandma." But he barely managed 2 sips before clamping his mouth shut, staring blankly at the ceiling. Nights were even harder. He had nightmares, jerking upright in bed with his mouth open, as if trying to scream, though no sound came out. I would cradle him, rocking, humming the lullaby I once sang to David when he was a baby. Still, Ethan shook with fear, sweat running down his small face. My hand trembled so badly the washcloth slipped from my grip. I asked for a psychologist. A young woman with a gentle voice came, sat beside Ethan, and held his hand. "Ethan, do you want to tell me something? Maybe about your dad, or anything you saw?" she asked softly. Ethan only squeezed the teddy bear tighter, eyes fixed on the floor, silent. My throat ached as I asked, "Doctor, will he ever talk again?" She gave me a compassionate look. "Ma'am, he just needs time. The shock was too much, but he'll open up eventually." "Not yet." Her words gave me little comfort. Time? How much time did I have, with David still missing and every day dragging me deeper into fear? On the morning of the 3rd day, I gently wiped Ethan's face with a damp cloth, trying to smile as I told him an old story. "When your daddy was a boy, he once broke one of my vases and tried to tape it back together. He was so silly," I said softly, "but he loved you more than anything in this world." Ethan didn't answer, but I noticed his small fingers tightening around the teddy bear, holding on like it was all he had left. I was about to go on when my purse buzzed. The caller ID flashed the police precinct. My heart dropped. A wave of dread washed over me. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone when I answered. On the other end, the detective's voice was heavy, nothing like his usual calm tone. "Mrs. Linda, I need you to prepare yourself. We just ran luminol at Mr. David's house, and we found a large amount of blood in the living room." For a moment, the world went silent. The washcloth slipped from my fingers and hit the floor. I couldn't feel my hands. "Blood," I whispered, my voice cracking. The detective kept talking, each word stabbing deeper. "It's very likely we're dealing with a homicide. The scene has been sealed while we wait for DNA results." I could barely process his words. Then Ethan tugged hard at my sleeve. I turned and saw his red, tear-filled eyes. He must have heard everything. After so many days of silence, he let out a cry so raw it shattered the room. "Dad, he's dead." His scream was weak but filled with unbearable pain, as if his world had collapsed. I fell back into the chair, wrapping him in my arms, tears soaking his shirt. "No, Ethan. No, it's not like that," I said, though I didn't believe my own words. His broken voice hit me like a hammer to the heart. The detective must have heard him over the line. "Ma'am, please, calm down. We're on our way to the hospital to take your statement." "Stay where you are," he said quickly. But I didn't answer, I just held Ethan tighter, refusing to let go. Doctors and nurses rushed in, alerted by his cries. A young nurse knelt beside me, touching my shoulder. "Mrs. Linda, please stay calm. Let us help him." But I shook my head, clutching Ethan close. No. I have to be here. I can't leave him, I choked out. The doctor gave him a mild sedative, and slowly his sobs faded, though his eyes stayed red and full of pain. I smoothed his damp hair and whispered, "Grandma's here, Ethan. I'm not going anywhere." Inside, though, I felt like I was falling into an endless abyss. If David was really... No, I couldn't finish the thought. My mind flashed back to the last time I saw my son, when he'd visited with a sweet cornbread cake I loved. "Take care of yourself, Mom," he'd said with that bright smile. That smile now felt like a ghost, erased by the detective's grim words and Ethan's desperate cry. An hour later, the detectives arrived at the hospital with a recorder and a notebook. A tall, slim officer sat near the bed and spoke gently. "Ethan, can you tell us, and your grandma, what happened?" I felt Ethan trembling in my arms, his thin shoulders shaking. He lowered his head, clinging to the teddy bear. I stroked his hair and whispered, "It's okay, Ethan. Just tell us. Grandma's right here." My voice tried to stay steady, but inside I was on the edge of a cliff. I dreaded what he might say, yet I needed the truth. After a long silence, Ethan gave the faintest nod. My chest tightened as I listened to his fragile, broken words. "It was raining really hard that night," he whispered. "I was in my room, playing with my Legos, building a tall tower. Dad said it was the prettiest one. Then the doorbell rang, over and over." He paused, squeezing the teddy bear tighter. I got curious and went to see. Dad was looking through the peephole, and his face was so tense. I'd never seen him like that. A shiver ran down my spine. David had always been calm, always hiding his worries to protect Ethan. What could have frightened him so badly? Ethan's voice grew even quieter. Dad turned and saw me standing there. He ran over, knelt down and whispered, "Ethan, get under the bed. Don't come out until I call for you, okay?" I was scared, but he pushed me toward my room and pulled the blanket down so no one could see me. I pictured my grandson, only 8 years old, crouched in the dark under that bed, not knowing what was coming. My chest ached as Ethan continued. Through the blanket, I saw my mom come in, with a really tall man. His face was so cold. He didn't say anything, just stood there with his arms crossed behind her. I froze. Jessica Miller. David's ex-wife. I never thought I'd hear her name again, never thought she could return after everything that had happened. Ethan's voice cracked as he whispered. Mom looked around the room and asked, "Where's Ethan?" I thought she was going to find me, but Dad told her, real calm, "He's at his grandma's for winter break." I knew my son was lying, but Ethan didn't move a muscle. I felt hot tears sliding down my cheeks. The officer kept writing, his face serious, though I noticed his hand pause when Ethan went on. "My mom started yelling at Dad," he said softly. "She wanted money. She said something about a debt, that if he didn't pay, there'd be trouble." But Dad shook his head. He told her she'd gone too far, that he was done letting her make his life miserable. Hearing that made my heart ache. David had tried so hard to escape Jessica's shadow, to build a better life for himself and Ethan. But she had returned, dragging chaos with her. Ethan's breathing grew shallow, like the memory was swallowing him. I rubbed his back and whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. Grandma's here." He drew in a shaky breath and pressed on. Then Mom and the tall man started fighting with Dad. She screamed, and the man stepped closer, saying something, like a threat. I didn't hear it all, but I saw him shove my dad. He stumbled back. Then the man shoved him harder. Dad fell, and hit his head on the corner of the table. It made a loud sound, and red water started coming out. Ethan broke down, burying his face in my chest, sobbing so hard his little body shook. I saw Dad lying there, not moving. I wanted to run out. I wanted to call him, but I was too scared. I was so scared. I held him tight, my own tears soaking his hair. The image of David falling replayed in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The officer finally set his pen down, looking at me with compassion. "This statement is very important, Mrs. Linda," he said in a solemn tone. "We're treating this as a homicide investigation. Your grandson has been very brave." I nodded, though inside I felt hollow, like nothing could ever fill the emptiness again. Ethan's sobs cut through me like knives. Through my tears, I asked the officer, "Will you find Jessica, And that man? He nodded firmly. We'll do everything possible, ma'am. I promise. After they left, I stayed, clutching Ethan in the heavy silence, the shadow of tragedy hanging over us. That night, I couldn't sleep. His soft cries filled the hospital room like echoes of my own pain. In his dreams, he whispered for his dad, so faint I had to lean close to hear. Each time, I wiped his damp face with a warm cloth, trying to soothe him, though my own chest ached with old wounds reopening. Memories came rushing back. I saw David in his 20s, full of hope, his career just beginning. I remembered the proud smile on his face when he introduced me to Jessica. "Mom, this is Jessica," he said, glowing. "She's going to be my wife." Back then, Jessica was sweet, a little clumsy, but always eager to do things right. She blushed when I showed her how to cook, and I thought, this girl will make my son happy. The whole family adored her, not just for her warm smile but for the way she looked at David like he was her whole world. Then Ethan was born, and our home filled with new light. I remember cradling him on our first walk around the yard, his big round eyes gazing at me with that toothless grin. Neighbors teased, "Linda, you look 10 years younger with that baby." I'd laugh, my heart overflowing with joy. Those were good years. David and Jessica visited often, bringing Ethan and stories of their little family. I believed it would always be that way, our lives full of laughter. But then cracks appeared. I'll never forget the call from David, his voice dull and worn. "Mom, Jessica got into some gambling trouble." I froze. I couldn't believe it. The sweet girl I'd trusted had slipped into something so destructive. David quietly sold the car he'd saved years for, just to cover her debts. I found him in the yard after, his eyes red though he forced a smile. "I'll be fine, Mom. I just want to help her." I wanted to beg him to stop, but I held my tongue, knowing how much he loved her. It didn't end there. Collectors showed up at my door next, threatening me over Jessica's debts. I had no choice but to hand over my savings, the nest egg I'd built for old age. But I didn't hesitate. Protecting my family came first. That night, David's voice broke as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. I never thought it would get this bad." I hugged him tight, promising family was meant to carry each other. But deep down, I felt the fear creeping in. Jessica wasn't the girl she used to be. Day by day, she changed, her warmth replaced with anger. She became irritable, smashing plates over the smallest things. And I began to realize, the happy family I thought was forever had started to fall apart. I remember one visit so clearly, walking into David's house and finding Ethan huddled in a corner, his little eyes red from crying. Jessica was standing over him, screaming, all because he'd spilled a glass of milk. "You're just as clumsy as your father," she snapped. My heart cracked in two. I rushed over, pulling Ethan into my arms, trying to calm her down. But Jessica only laughed bitterly. "He's my son. I know how to raise him." Those words cut me like a knife. Ethan didn't deserve that anger, and David. My poor David looked hollow, his once bright eyes clouded with exhaustion and helplessness. Many nights he called me, his voice breaking. "Mom, I can't take it anymore. Jessica's not the woman I married. I'm afraid she'll hurt Ethan." Those calls broke me, but all I could say was, "Son, I'm here. Whatever you need, I'll help you." At last, David chose to divorce and fight for custody. The day the judge granted it, I saw him breathe like a man set free. I felt it too, that maybe finally, father and son could live in peace, without Jessica shouting, without the debts dragging them down. But I was wrong. Barely half a year later, Jessica came back, and with her, a storm far worse than before. Ethan's story about that night replayed in my mind again and again. David collapsing, blood on the floor, Jessica with that cold stranger. The woman I had once loved like a daughter had turned into someone cruel, unrecognizable. That night, as I sat in the dark hospital room, watching Ethan toss and whisper for his dad in his sleep, I made a vow. "David, I'll get justice for you. And I'll protect Ethan, no matter what it costs me." The next morning, sunlight spilled through the hospital window, but I still felt cold inside. Ethan looked calmer after the sedative, his little face soft in sleep, though the pain lingered like a shadow. Then my phone buzzed. The precinct. The detective's voice was firm. "Mrs. Linda, we have new information. Can you come to the station right away?" I nodded, though he couldn't see me, and whispered to Ethan, "Grandma will be back soon." Be good. The nurse will take care of you. I left him with a young nurse I'd come to trust and hurried out, my thoughts tangled. On the bus ride, the city blurred past the window, but all I saw was the image of David falling, over and over. My hands clenched my shawl tight, holding back tears. At the precinct, the lead detective, sharp-eyed, with a voice that carried weight, spread a map across the table. Several red dots were marked around David's home. We've got a lead, he said. A neighbor's security camera caught a suspicious truck the night of the storm. My pulse quickened as he played the footage. The video was grainy, but there it was, a dark truck idling in front of David's house. Under the dim streetlight, I could see something long, hidden beneath a tarp in the truck bed. Minutes later, the truck drove off. We can't make out the plates, the detective explained, pointing at the blurred frame. But the model matches vehicles used by a local loan shark gang. My stomach dropped. Ethan's words rushed back. Jessica, the tall man, the blanket, dragging David's body, that long shape under the tarp. I didn't want to believe it, but the image cut me like a blade. A younger officer added, we traced the truck on traffic cameras. It shows up a couple more times, then disappears near the outskirts. We've got patrols searching already. My fists tightened until my nails dug into my palms. Are you sure that truck's involved? I asked, my voice shaking. The lead detective met my eyes, steady and determined. It's circumstantial, but it's important, Mrs. Linda. We're not letting this go. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. But it came with fear, because I didn't know if I could bear what they might uncover. After the briefing, the detective suggested I return with them to David's house. My chest tightened. I didn't want to set foot there again, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. The yellow tape still stretched across the door like a wound that refused to close. Inside, the forensics team moved carefully, snapping photos, collecting evidence. I stood on the porch, my eyes fixed on the dried coffee stain in the living room, the same one I had stepped over that awful night. That stain, mixed with shards of porcelain, was etched into my memory, like a scar I'd carry for the rest of my life. Out of nowhere, one of the neighbors shuffled up to me, a frail woman leaning hard on her cane. Mrs. Rose, from across the street. She lowered her voice, as if she was afraid someone might hear. Linda, that night when the rain was pouring, I heard a terrible fight at David's house. Shouting. Furniture banging around. I wanted to call the police, but I was scared. Scared they'd come after me. Her eyes filled with guilt as she lowered her head. I squeezed her hand and whispered back, "Thank you for telling me. Can you share this with the police now?" She nodded, and I led her over to the younger officer. He listened carefully, wrote everything down, thanked her, and promised to follow up. I watched her walk away, my chest heavy with blame. If only I had gone to David sooner, would it have changed anything? Before I left, the lead detective gave my shoulder a light pat. We're going to find that truck, Mrs. Linda. Have faith. I nodded, though deep down I wasn't sure I had any faith left to give. The sun was shining outside, but inside me, the sky was dark. A few days later, the call came. The detective's voice was steady but urgent. Mrs. Linda, we've tracked down the address of Jessica's apartment. Would you like to come with us? I turned to look at Ethan, sitting on the hospital bed, his teddy bear clutched to his chest, his eyes lost somewhere far away. I hated leaving him, but I knew I had to go. If there was even the smallest clue about Jessica, or about David, I had to see it. I'm on my way, I said, my voice trembling. I stroked Ethan's hair, whispered, Grandma will be back soon. Be good for the nurse, and left him in her care once again. Jessica's apartment was tucked down a forgotten alley, a part of the city where walls peeled, the air stank of dampness and car exhaust. 2 officers walked beside me, our steps heavy in the mud. My heart raced, not from the walk, but from the fear of what we might uncover. When we arrived, the landlady sat slouched at the entrance, puffing on a cigarette. Her face was sour, as if nothing surprised her anymore. She sighed when she saw the police. That Jessica, she muttered. She left 2 weeks ago. Dropped off her keys and took off. Her words hit me like a punch. 2 weeks ago, the very same time David disappeared. I froze, gripping my shawl to steady myself. The tall young officer asked, Did she leave with a lot of stuff? The woman stubbed her cigarette.
Yeah.
A huge suitcase. Looked like she was in a rush, like she was running from something. Even paid some guy to drive her out in the middle of the night.
Didn't say much, just paid up and left.
Just then, a man appeared at the end of the alley. He looked rough, scarred face, worn leather jacket, eyes darting. He walked up to the landlady and growled in a raspy voice. "Is Jessica here?"
"I need to see her now."
The detective stepped forward, his stare sharp as ice.
"Who are you?
"What's your business with Jessica Miller?" The man froze, stammered, then tried to back away, but the young officer blocked him.
With a heavy sigh, the stranger muttered, "Name's Ronnie. She owes me a lot of money.
I'm her loan shark. She promised she'd pay it all back in 2 weeks, but now she's gone." The officers and I exchanged glances, unspoken thoughts bouncing between us. Jessica vanished the same moment David disappeared.
And now, the promise of a large sum of money.
The younger officer murmured, almost to himself. Why would she be so sure she'd have money in 2 weeks if she was already desperate enough to come begging from her ex-husband?
The words pierced me. A sickening feeling coiled in my chest.
Something darker was hiding behind all this, something worse than I had ever imagined. That night, back at the hospital, I sat by Ethan's bed. The dim light from the hallway cast shadows across his small, sleeping face. He still clutched his teddy bear, holding on to it as if
it were the only thing anchoring him to life.
I held his hand, his thin fingers barely warm, and tried to calm the storm raging inside me. And then, like lightning through the dark, a memory flashed. Years ago, back when David and Jessica were still happy, David had shown me the papers with a proud smile. "Mom, I want to make sure my family is protected. If anything happens to me, Jessica and Ethan won't have to worry." It was his life insurance policy. And at that time, the sole beneficiary was Jessica. My stomach dropped. David never mentioned changing it after the divorce. That realization stabbed me deeper than anything else. Could Jessica really have been desperate enough to look at David's life insurance as her way out? The thought made me tremble, not from the cold, but from the horrible weight pressing on my chest. I glanced at Ethan, watching him cry in his sleep, lips still whispering for his dad. I couldn't sit still another moment. The next morning, I called the detective, my voice shaking. I remembered something. David had a life insurance policy. Jessica was listed as the only beneficiary.
"Can you check on that?" There was silence on the line before he answered. "Thank you, Mrs. Linda. That could be a key lead. We'll head to David's house right now."
Once again, I left Ethan in the nurse's care, begging her not to let him be alone. Then I went with the police to David's house. The yellow tape still hung across the door like a scar. Inside, the house felt colder than ever, the forensics team already gone. The detective led me and the younger officer into David's study. They dug through his file cabinet, folder after folder, while I stood clutching my shawl, my stomach tied in knots.
After more than an hour, the younger officer exclaimed, "Found it." He held up a blue folder.
The detective read through it, his jaw tight, then tapped it sharply against the desk.
"Here it is, the motive." I forced myself to look.
Jessica's name was printed clearly as the beneficiary. My knees buckled, and I sank into a chair, tears running down my face.
"Why didn't you change it, David?" I whispered. "Why'd you leave her the chance?" The detective placed a hand on my shoulder.
"Mrs. Linda, if David's death was staged as an accident, Jessica would collect the full payout. Enough to clear her debts and live well.
That may be exactly why he disappeared."
His words struck like a hammer.
Rage boiled inside me.
Jessica, once like a daughter to me, had turned into a monster willing to destroy my son for money. I remembered her young smile beside David, so full of hope, and wondered, was it ambition, desperation, or had she always been this way, hiding it until now? That afternoon, back at the hospital, the detective called again, his tone more urgent. "Mrs. Linda, we just got word from the investigation team. They've located an abandoned frozen goods warehouse on the outskirts, property used by the Lone Shark Gang.
We've sent a unit there."
My chest tightened like a drumbeat.
"What do you expect to find?"
I asked, barely able to get the words out.
"We're not certain," he said slowly, "but we may find a clue about Mr. David."
That night, I sat by Ethan's bed, my hands trembling so badly I couldn't even hold a glass of water. When the phone rang again, I nearly dropped it. On the other end, a police officer's voice hesitated, as if weighing every word.
Mrs. Linda, a body has been found. A man, hidden inside that warehouse. We believe it may be Mr. David.
The world collapsed. My throat closed, and no sound would come. My son, the person I loved most, was now reduced to a body in a frozen warehouse. I wanted to scream it wasn't true, but only tears fell.
Are you sure?
I whispered.
We'll need you to come identify him, the officer said gently. Please, prepare yourself.
The next morning, I rode in the back of a patrol car to the morgue, dread clutching me like ice. I clutched my shawl, staring out the window, but all I saw was David's smile. I remembered him teasing me the day I burned the cornbread. "Mom, if you ever open a bakery, I'll be your first customer," he had said, grinning. That smile was all I could see, and it was slipping further away. When the car stopped, I felt like I was moving through a dream.
The younger officer, the one who'd been by my side these past days, placed a hand on my shoulder. Mrs. Linda, are you ready? I nodded, though nothing could have prepared me.
The door opened, a blast of cold air and the sharp scent of chemicals striking me. Slowly, the white sheet was pulled back.
And there he was. David.
His face was pale, changed by death, but I knew him instantly. His thick brows, his straight nose, those lips I kissed countless times when he was a baby.
He was still my son.
My knees gave out, and I collapsed, sobbing, the only words escaping my mouth. My son. I wanted to touch him, to hold him one last time, but my hands shook too violently to reach. The young officer helped me up, his own voice heavy with sorrow.
We're so sorry, Mrs. Linda.
Please, sit. But I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to do anything but scream to the heavens why my son had to be taken from me this way.
When I had calmed just enough to stand, the medical examiner stepped forward, a solemn man with a low, steady voice.
Holding a folder, he explained, the victim died from a severe, traumatic brain injury caused by impact with a hard object. Estimated time of death, the night of the storm, 2 weeks ago. His words confirmed Ethan's story about that terrible night, about David collapsing on the floor. I nodded faintly, though each word cut deeper, like a blade twisting in my chest. Thank you, I whispered, not even sure why. Maybe because, even if cruel, the truth was finally being spoken. But the investigation didn't stop there. At noon, the detective called me, his tone firm, edged with anger. Mrs. Linda, we found a blanket with bloodstains in the truck bed, along with a woman's jacket. The DNA confirms it's David's blood, and the jacket belongs to Jessica. My knees gave out, and I sank into a chair in the hospital hallway, pressing my hands against my heart. The pieces were no longer scattered, they had locked into place, forming a picture so horrifying it left me cold.
Jessica had done it.
She had taken David's life. Building on the loan shark's testimony, the police arrested the man who had been with her that night. They invited me to the precinct to watch the interrogation from behind the one-way glass.
At first, the rough-looking man grunted. I don't know anything. I just went with her. But when the detective slammed the evidence on the table, Jessica's jacket, the bloody blanket, his face turned pale, sweat dripping down his temples.
You think we don't know? The detective snapped.
You helped her hide the body.
Talk, unless you want your sentence doubled. Cornered, he caved, spilling everything. Jessica was hiding in an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. Standing outside the interrogation room, clutching my shawl, I felt the world tilt.
Jessica, the same woman who once sat at my table, laughing with Ethan, passing me the bread basket, was now a fugitive with blood on her hands.
I remembered her cold words from years ago, right before the divorce. Stay out of it, Linda. This is between David and me. I had tried to remind her Ethan needed a mother, but she only laughed bitterly. That laugh echoed in my ears now, a warning I had ignored. Days later, word came. Jessica was in custody. They caught her in a dingy copy shop, trying to forge documents to flee. The detective called, his voice quiet but steady. Mrs. Linda, we have her.
Do you want to come to the precinct?
I looked over at Ethan, sitting on his hospital bed, drawing with one hand while hugging his teddy bear with the other.
My throat tightened. No, I said, my voice breaking. I don't want to see her. Just make sure she never escapes again. But fate had other plans. When the police marched Jessica down the hallway in handcuffs, I was there. Her face was gaunt, her hair a mess. I felt a storm inside me, rage boiling, but beneath it, an odd flicker of pity. Jessica, once my daughter-in-law, once Ethan's mother, had destroyed not only my son's life, but her own. The trial drew heavy attention, filling the courthouse with reporters and strangers. I sat in the front row, gripping Ethan's trembling hand. He didn't want to be there, but I'd whispered, "Sweetheart, we have to do this for your dad. Grandma's right here." He nodded weakly, eyes still clouded with fear. The air inside was suffocating, every breath thick with tension. The prosecutor, tall and sharp-voiced, laid out the case piece by piece. He played the recording of Ethan's statement, his tiny voice shaking as he described that stormy night. My chest ached so badly I pulled Ethan close, holding him as he buried his face in his bear. The prosecutor projected photos of the blood-stained blanket and Jessica's jacket. "The DNA matches the victim, Mr. David," he said coldly. Next came the blurry footage of the truck beneath the streetlight, carrying something long under a tarp. Finally, he raised the insurance folder and pointed at Jessica's name printed boldly. "This was the motive," he declared, his voice echoing. "The defendant murdered for money, to collect life insurance, to pay off debts, to live in comfort." I turned to look at Jessica, slumped in the defendant's chair. At first she sat stone-faced, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. But as the evidence stacked higher, her composure cracked. Suddenly, she leapt to her feet and cried out, "I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted the money." Her voice shattered, but no one in that courtroom felt sympathy. The prosecutor's voice cut through the courtroom, cold and sharp. "If you only wanted money, then why did you hide the body? Why stage an accident and try to cash in a life insurance policy?" Jessica froze, her lips moving but no words coming out. Then suddenly, she spun on her accomplice, the rough man from that stormy night. "It was him," she shouted, her voice shrill. "He pushed David." The man shot to his feet, his face red with fury. "You're lying. You planned everything. I only did what you told me. You said to push him, to help you hide the body." The air in the courtroom grew so heavy I could barely breathe. Murmurs rippled like waves through the crowd. I pulled Ethan close, feeling him tremble. His small voice broke my heart. "Grandma, it was all my fault, wasn't it?" I kissed the top of his head, stroking his hair. "No, sweetheart. None of this was your fault. Your mom made terrible choices, and now she's going to face the consequences." But inside, I knew those words couldn't heal the wound carved into his little soul. After long hours of deliberation, the judge, a woman with a steady, unyielding gaze, stood and delivered the verdict. Her voice was clear, echoing through the silent room. The defendant, Jessica Miller, is found guilty of first-degree murder and fraud. She is sentenced to life in prison without parole. The accomplice is found guilty of accessory to murder and concealment, and is sentenced to 20 years. The weight of it all hit me at once. I broke down, clutching Ethan to my chest as tears poured out, tears of grief for David, and of relief that justice had been done. Ethan buried his face against me, sobbing, and I whispered through my own cries, "It's over, my boy. Your dad can finally rest in peace." Weeks later, I closed David's house for good. The rooms that once echoed with laughter were now only shadows of pain. Ethan came to live with me in my small town, and I put him in therapy, praying the scars inside him would slowly mend. Every night, I sat by his side, telling him stories about his dad as a boy, how he always wanted me to be proud of him, how he never stopped smiling. "Your dad loved you more than anything, Ethan," I whispered as I stroked his hair. "And Grandma loves you too." One night, with Ethan asleep in my arms, I looked out the window. Moonlight spilled across us like a soft blanket. "My son," I whispered to the sky, "I promise you I'll raise and protect Ethan for you. Justice has been done." Tears ran down my cheeks, but for the first time, I felt a touch of peace, as if David was smiling down from somewhere above. I hugged Ethan tighter, knowing that while the pain of losing my son would never disappear, I still had his little boy, and I would spend the rest of my life protecting him, just as David would have wanted. And to you, who have walked with me through this story, never take family for granted. One moment of neglect can open the door to tragedy. Greed and betrayal can turn loved ones into strangers, but if you hold firm,
Justice has a way of speaking through the darkness. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've been through something like this, share your story in the comments.